Before we start the tutorial, I wanted to take a few seconds and mention that if you want to learn on how to use the landscape system within UDK, you may want to check out UDK Landscape How to Guide to Landscape Creation. You can find out more at worldofleveldesign.com/guides and just click over to the UDK tab. Alright, now on to the tutorial. In this video, I have a challenge for you. Challenges are a great way to isolate a specific aspect of level design or game environment art process and get better at it. And this specific challenge is a UDK landscape challenge. So what this challenge will do is it will help you to create your landscapes faster. It will teach you how to form your landscapes that are based on real-world terrain. It will teach you how to shape and focus on the silhouette of the landscape. It will speed up your workflow, help you to develop a repeatable pattern of working with the landscape. It will help you to pay attention to detail using photo reference as a guide. And every time you do this challenge, your work and your landscape workflow will get better. So here's the criteria for the challenge. Manually recreate a landscape from a reference image. You can only use paint, smooth, flatten, noise, and erosion tools. You can only focus on one single peak, one mountain section. So if you have an image that contains a large landscape, you have to pick one section out of that landscape, one single peak, and recreate it as best as you can and ignore the rest of the landscape. Your time limit is 30 minutes or less, and software for this challenge is UDK. There are a few restrictions and self-imposed limitations. These are: you cannot use any external software to create your height map. Everything has to be manually painted using the landscape mode. You cannot use random generation of the landscape such as noise or erosion to speed up that process. You have to use the paint tool, smooth, flatten to build up the landscape. You can use noise and erosion to detail, but not to form the initial mass and the silhouette of the landscape. And no materials or painting terrain texture layers. This has to be the default texture that comes with UDK. And the last thing is, please post your work, the result of the challenge that you've done, at worldofleveldesign.net, and just scroll down until you see official WOLD challenges, and inside this you will see a UDK landscape challenge. You can repeat this challenge as many times as you want, and every time you do this challenge you will get better and faster at recreating a landscape from a reference image. Find yourself an image that you want to use for this challenge. It can be any image of a landscape. But what you want to focus on is a specific area, one single peak within that landscape. So instead of focusing on the entire image and the entire landscape, you just want to pick out one area. So for our exercise, I'm going to use this image right here, and I'm going to focus on this terrain section and not worry about everything else. So for example, if you have something bigger like this, just pick out one section, such as something like this here on the left, or maybe this main area, and focus on sculpting this one area only. So once you have an image picked out, start up UDK and use any of the available templates that come with UDK. So you don't have to recreate the sky, insert a light mass appearance volume, set up lighting. Just choose one of the default templates, preferably daytime, but you can use any other ones found here, afternoon, morning, or night. But I'm going to stick with midday lighting. So let's go ahead, select ground plane, hit delete, and create a landscape. For this challenge, I'm going to set my height map size to 255 by 255. To get the height map size that are recommended by Epic, you may want to go to recommended landscape sizes under UDN pages and use any of these overall sizes here in vertices. So the one that we are using is 255 by 255. So once we have the size vertices set, let's go ahead and create a landscape. Next thing we want to do is let's go back to our camera mode and change the camera movement speed to something faster. So fast to very fast, so you can navigate inside the viewport a lot faster. I'm going to grab this box and just drag it away from the mid-center. So we're going to create a landscape somewhere right in the middle, and we want to compare the scale to something that's within the world, to a character reference. So we can use this box, but we can also input a skeletal reference mesh that will help us judge how large this landscape is. So let's go ahead to content browser and insert that really quick. I'm going to filter by skeletal meshes, Scroll down and let's select this Iron Guard Male A. And I'm just going to left click and drag right next to this box. Let's switch to slow camera movement speed and let's raise him up and put him right on the ground and let's rotate it. Here we go. Now I want to move him over. I want to position the camera somewhere right around here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to press Control 1. This will remember my camera position, so anytime I fly away and I want to get back to see how large the landscape is, I just have to press 1 on the keyboard and it'll jump back to the set reference position. You can set multiple of these by using Control 1, 2, 3 and so on, and then just use the numbers on the keyboard to get back to that camera position. Now that we have our scene set, let's go ahead and begin sculpting our landscape. So I went ahead and started my timer, and the goal is to do this small little section of the landscape under 30 minutes. Here I just took a few seconds and repositioned the character scale and the box to a different location so I can sculpt the landscape in one of the sections of the checkered material. Instead of overlapping with the purple and the white, I want it to be just in one area, so I get that default texture on the entire landscape. It's just easier to see. So the first thing I do is I begin to use the paintbrush tool with tool strength set to about 1.2, 1.3 and a large brush size. And looking back over the reference, I begin to get a large mass going. What I'm looking for is kind of the footprint of the landscape, and I'm trying to roughly block in the shape of where and how the terrain extends from its location. So little ridges that begin from the top down, sloping away to the right, to the left. I'm trying to block that in and get those rough shapes to block in as a starting point. So the first step is to use the paintbrush tool and get that mass, that shape of the entire landscape blocked in. Another setting that I make sure to enable in the paintbrush is clay brush, which will help to naturally form and build up your landscape. So here I'm doing a couple of things. First is I wanted to get rid of the skybox, so it's not in view and I can see the silhouette of the landscape better. So I selected the skybox and put it on its own layer and then hid that layer. And another thing is I rebuilt lighting so that I get to see the shadows and the lighting representation a lot better. I switched over to textile density viewport view, and now I am beginning to get a little bit more closer to refining the shape and focusing on the silhouette of the landscape. So once the mass has been blocked in and a rough shape, now the next step is to begin to refine that shape and focus on the silhouette. So I am jumping back to the camera reference position so I can see from the point of view of the player of how that silhouette is going to be. I'm also jumping back very often to the reference and comparing it and seeing it how it compares to the UDK landscape. As I begin to refine the silhouette and the shape, I am lowering the brush size to a lower value, and I'm also changing the tool strength to less intensity so I can work and begin to get that shape in. I'm using Control left click to build that up, and then I'm using Control Shift left click to carve away. And these two button combinations help to refine the silhouette and shape and carve away a lot better. At this point I'm about 12 minutes into the process, and majority of the time now I am focusing on making sure that the silhouette and the shape of the landscape matches the image reference. So I'm getting closer to the peaks, I'm trying to extend the ridges and build up that detail, that shape that I see in the reference. I'm paying attention to how the mountain, the landscape connects to the ground on the bottom, and I'm also trying to see how the ridges extend from the top, from the peak, and as they go down to the ground plane. At this point I feel that I got as much as I could from the paintbrush, and I'm switching over to the erosion tool, in specific to thermal erosion, to give me that extra detail in the landscape. I changed a few settings, in specifically threshold, and I'm increasing the brush size. And I'm just going over the bottom edges of the landscape, the ground plane, and creating a little bit variation. And then I'm coming back up to the ridges, changing the build-up to both, to include subtraction and addition, and lowering the noise scale so I get a little bit more detail. And I'm just going over the landscape, over the ridges, and adding that extra detail that helps me to speed up that process and add more natural formation that you would actually see in the environment. I am about 20 minutes in at this point, close to 18 to 20 minutes, and I feel that the shape is looking good enough. So now I just add a little bit of a ground variation on the bottom, on the ground plane, using the noise tool, and then I'm coming back up and adding a little bit of more detail in the ridges and in the actual landscape itself. Then I'm coming back with the paintbrush tool and just refining some of the other elements of the ridges and making sure that the silhouette wasn't broken when I was using the smooth tool, the erosion tool, and the noise tool. For this challenge, for this exercise, I'm trying not to focus too much on the back of the landscape, because the entire perception and the view is going to be from the front as it was in the reference image. So even though I'm trying to go back and refine some of the elements using the erosion tool in the back, I'm trying to not to spend too much time on the landscape on the back end and focus only on the front and how it looks from the image, from the reference. I am now finishing up using some of the erosion tools, the noise tool, and the smooth tool to build up the ground plane and how the landscape connects to that ground plane. From the reference, you can see as it begins to taper off and ground itself, there's a lot of smooth areas that connect the actual mountain, the actual landscape, to the ground plane. So I'm trying to mimic that in the final design. I'm now putting some final touches using the paint tool, the thermal erosion, noise, and smooth, and I'm about to call it done at about 26 minutes in. So at 26 minutes in, this is not bad. Could be a lot better, could be a lot shorter, and with more practice you could probably do this in half the time and with more intricate landscape section. So as you start doing this, you may find yourself working a lot slower, but as you continue to do this challenge over and over again, you'll be able to sculpt your landscapes close to the reference image a lot faster. So if you find yourself not liking where you started, just start with a new landscape and restart. Start over with the challenge to a point where you can begin to sculpt these landscapes without thinking about them. So I hope this challenge, this exercise was helpful, and I hope to see some of your work and what you did for this challenge on the forums.